Good morning, everybody. That's kind of what I expected on daylight savings time, to be honest with you. Didn't expect a whole lot more than that, but man, you guys are like the real MVPs to get out on daylight. I mean, not as much of an MVP as first service was, but to get out, on daylight savings time, we appreciate you. But today we are in week 6 of our 7-week series on the 7 letters in Revelation. And if you've been with us over the past several weeks, you've heard us talk about how this book was written by the Apostle John, and it was really this revelation, this vision that he had of King Jesus, of this victorious Jesus. I mean, just this glorified Jesus. And one of the very first things that happens in this book is Jesus ends up writing these letters to these 7 very, very real churches in and around Ephesus in Asia Minor. Throughout this series, we've already seen Jesus address the church in Ephesus, who was known as a loveless church. If you looked at them from the outside, it looked like that they had everything going in the right direction. All the community would have been so impressed with them. They would have been growing. All the things that church people want to see happen would have been happening there. But their hearts had grown cold, and they were operating solely out of routine and no longer out of a love for Jesus. We talked about the church in Smyrna, which was this suffering church. And Jesus' message to this church in Smyrna was essentially, I know that this is hard, but I can promise you, it is better for you to suffer with me than to be without me and not have to suffer. We talked about the church in Pergamum, who was known as this compromising church. And just the title tells you everything you need to know. A little give here and a little give there, and all of a sudden you look up and you are so far from where you intended to be. The church in Thyatira was known as the tolerating church. This church that so desperately wanted to be loved and looked at by all the people in their community that they were afraid to call sin, and Jesus wasn't very happy with that. And then last week, Trey got to talk about the church in Sardis, and man, what a fun church to get to talk about. It's kind of like the perpetual daylight savings time church, I think is how you could call it. It's the dead church, and it's the church that needs to wake up. And Trey did a great job with that last week. But today we're going to talk about another church that comes from a city that has a pretty familiar name. We're going to talk about the church in Philadelphia. And obviously, just so there's no confusion here, this church is not located in Pennsylvania. But this church is also located in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. But the nickname of this city is the exact same as the Philadelphia that we know here. It's the city of brotherly love. And the reason it was known as that is because the ancient city of Philadelphia was founded by Attalus II, about 150 years before Jesus. And the reason Attalus named this city Philadelphia was to honor his older brother, whom he deeply loved. But whenever you read about the city of Philadelphia, it's, again, kind of one of these smaller, insignificant towns. They weren't known for much, and if you try to study, very much about them, you're going to end up finding probably 2 or 3 main things. I'm just going to mention 2 of them to you today. The first thing that you're going to see is that the city of Philadelphia had this very, very unique soil. And the reason it had this unique soil was because it was built on the edge of this volcanic region. And so that produced this unique soil that was perfect for growing grapes and other kinds of produce. And so one of the things that Philadelphia was known for was having some of the finest wines that would have been available in that day. So, maybe some of you would love Philadelphia, but it would have been known for these fine wines. But the other thing, and probably the primary thing that Philadelphia was known for, again, because of where it was located on the edge of this volcanic region, was that Philadelphia commonly had these extremely violent earthquakes. In 17 AD, in fact, the ancient city of Philadelphia, it was completely destroyed by this violent earthquake. And the earthquake was so violent that for the next 20 plus years, aftershocks continued over and over and over and over again. And so the people who lived in Philadelphia, and this is one of the main reasons why Philadelphia was so small, is people got tired of all the earthquakes. They would get everything rebuilt, and then another aftershock would come, and it would knock everything back down. And then they would rebuild again, and then it would come and get knocked down again. And so many people began to move away to try and find someplace a little bit more stable to live. But for those who stayed, the reason that they stayed was because of the soil. They were farmers. And the soil was so good that they were willing to put up with all the uncertainty that came with the earthquakes that could happen. They lived in houses with cracks in their walls and cracks in their foundation that were just serving as constant reminders of what was likely to come. But another interesting thing about Philadelphia, or at least it's interesting to me, is whenever they were experiencing all these earthquakes, is how generous and how kind Rome actually was to this city. The things that Rome would do to help them try and get back on their feet, probably the most generous thing that Rome did is for certain periods of time, whenever they were trying to rebuild, Rome would come in and actually exempt the people in Philadelphia from having to pay taxes. And whenever you think about ancient Rome, that doesn't sound, very compatible, but they wanted to do something to try and help this city stimulate their economy. And as a result of this, the people in Philadelphia, they held a great affinity and a great loyalty to Rome and to Caesar. And again, if you've been here the last several weeks, you've heard us talk about multiple times now that there were these churches that who were controlled by the Roman government, that pagan worship was a big deal there. That was true in Philadelphia as well. The emperor worship was very big there. Again, that was true in Philadelphia as well. So while the city of Philadelphia was known for earthquakes and wine, the people of Philadelphia were known for their loyalty to Rome and their constant fear of disaster. And this is where the church in Philadelphia finds themselves. And so Jesus, he writes this letter to this church during a time of opposition and to encourage them. And for the church in Philadelphia, it appears that even though they were living in a very pagan culture, that their primary opposition was coming from the local Jews in their city. And that wasn't an uncommon thing whenever you look throughout the entire New Testament. Some of the main people who were pushing against the ministry of Jesus were the local religious Jewish leaders. Some of the people who would arrest the Apostle Paul or try to kill the Apostle Paul were some of the local Jewish leaders. They couldn't understand, and they weren't okay with this teaching that the resurrection of Jesus, that Jesus somehow superseded who Moses was, and so they did everything they could to try and stomp out that message. But they were exactly right. Like, they understood what the message was, they just didn't like it, and so they would oppose and they would persecute the Christians. And so here's what Jesus says to the church in Philadelphia, beginning in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the keys of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. And so right here, these words, who holds the key of David. Those words are taken directly from Isaiah chapter 22. And in Isaiah 22, you see a man by the name of Eliakim. And in Eliakim, we get this picture of the coming Messiah. But these keys, whenever you read about these keys represent power. My brother, he tells a story about this summer. I think it was like before his senior year of high school or something, and he worked for our local school district, Carthage R9 school district, and he was just a gopher. Like, anything that they needed done, he would run around and do. And one of the things that they always talked about, as they were working with custodians and maintenance people, when they were trying to figure out who do they listen to, who do they get their directions from, this is how they figured it out. They said, whoever holds the most keys holds the most power. Whoever holds the most keys holds the most power. And that's kind of what's going on here in Isaiah 22 and in Revelation 3. So in Isaiah 22, we see this messianic prophecy that says that the Messiah would hold the keys. That what the Messiah opens, no one can shut. And what the Messiah shuts, no one can open. So here to the church in Philadelphia, Jesus says, I'm that guy. I'm the one. I'm the Messiah. I hold the keys to the kingdom, the keys to life and death, the keys to heaven and hell. No one can lock what I've opened, and no one can pry open what I've locked. Jesus holds the keys. Why? Because Jesus holds the power. So it continues in verse 8, and Jesus says, I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength, yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but they are liars. Again, that's where the main opposition is coming from. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. In verse 11, he says, I am coming soon. So hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. So you go back to verse 8, and Jesus says that he has placed an open door before them. Meaning that there's an opportunity that he has placed before them, that there is a divinely given opportunity that has been placed before the church in Philadelphia that no one can take away. Yes, you will face opposition. But while you are facing opposition, do not miss it, and this could be so huge for us. While you are facing opposition, you are also staring down opportunity. Whenever you look at the church in Philadelphia and you study the church in Philadelphia, one thing becomes really, really clear, really, really fast, and that's that the church in Philadelphia was a Great Commission church. Every single church should desire to be a Great Commission church. Every single Christian should desire to be a Great Commission Christian. And historically speaking, whenever you look at the church in Philadelphia, they were given these they had these divinely given opportunities, and they capitalized on them. This little tiny church in this little tiny insignificant town of Philadelphia is known for being a missionary sending church. They are known for being a church planting church. In fact, church history even suggests that the church today in India exists because of this little tiny church and these Christians in the ancient city of Philadelphia. There's a theologian by the name of Henry Martin, and he says this quote, and it is so convicting. He says, the Spirit of Christ is the spirit of missions. Listen, the nearer we get to Jesus, the more intensely missionary we become. The church in Philadelphia was given an opportunity, and they seized it by walking through an open door. If you continue to look in verse 8, you see that Jesus acknowledges that this church, they have little strength. They are a small church with limited influence and limited resources. And because they're so small and they've been opposed so heavily, they are a tired church. They're an exhausted church. They are a weary church. Have you ever felt that way, church? That you just have so little power. You look at the world and you see that it's falling apart at the seams, and you become so frustrated because you don't feel like there's anything you can do. May I remind you this morning that there is so much strength in your weakness. And this is the story of the church in Philadelphia. And Jesus encourages them, and he tells them, I know that you faced opposition. I know that you faced so many trials. I know that people just continually come and stand against you, trying to drown out your message. But Jesus says, but through it all, you have not denied my name. Through all the pressure to give in, through all the pressure to devalue or to simply deny the name of Jesus, they have stood firm. Through all the pressure to not stay true to his word or to his teaching, they've stayed firm. Daily, this church has felt this pressure, but they have stayed true. And so Jesus says to them in verse 9, he reminds them, just in case you've missed it, just in case you can't tell from everything that's going on around you, don't forget that I love you. And not only does Jesus say, I love you, but he also says, and those who are opposing you, they're going to recognize and they're going to acknowledge that I love you. Can we just take a minute and let that sink in here? We're talking about the resurrected Jesus Christ, saying to the church, I love you. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, saying to the church, I love you. The resurrected and the victorious King Jesus, church, he loves you. And keep that in mind as you face opposition, because then you will be able to hold on. You will know that he is with you, so don't give up. He continues in verse 12, the one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I also write on them my new name. And then as he ends all these letters in verse 13, whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Can you imagine what it would have been like in Philadelphia? The day that their pastor stood up and he read this letter to the church. As he read these words, I will write on him, I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God, and I'll also write on him my new name. Jesus tells this church that I will change your name to an unchanging name. I will change your name to a name that will stand forever, that you will live in and be citizens of an eternal city that cannot and will not ever be shaken. I know you are used to all of your surroundings shaking over and over again. That's not going to happen forever. You're not going to have to worry about moving forever. You're not going to have to worry about hiding forever. You're not going to have to worry about evacuating from disaster forever. You're not always going to have to worry about, do I need to leave, or do I need to board up, or do I need to pick up? Am I going to have to rebuild again? You're not going to have to worry about that forever. Can you imagine sitting in this little congregation hearing those words from the victorious King Jesus? To the church in Philadelphia, I know your work. I know you're working. I'm going to give you more opportunities in spite of the opposition that you're facing. But just keep holding on to my name and to my words. And the one who opposes you, he will not win. So hold on. Don't give up and don't give in. Even though you are small and even though your influence is lacking, you are going to be a pillar in the heavens. This church in Philadelphia, they were a good church. You could even say they were a great church. Jesus has nothing too bad to say about this church. So here's the question. What can we take away from this church? The first thing I'd like for us to take away is this. Jesus opens doors. Jesus opens doors. Think about it. This is what the entire Great Commission comes down to. Jesus opens doors. Jesus presents us with open doors all the time, every day, minute by minute, hour by hour, to be able to fulfill this Great Commission. You guys remember the Great Commission. It's some of the very last words that Jesus said to his disciples, some of the very last words the disciples heard out of the physical mouth of Jesus. He's already resurrected. He's getting ready to ascend into heaven, and he says these words, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I don't want you to overlook those words. So often whenever we go through the Great Commission, we just skip over that part, but that's the part that makes the Great Commission so great. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, Jesus says. The one who opens the doors for you. All authority in heaven and on earth belongs to him. So he says, therefore, go. Don't stay where you are. Don't keep everything to yourself, but go and make disciples. Baptizing people of, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Teaching them everything that I have taught you, everything that I have commanded you. Don't keep it to yourself. Go. And remember that I am with you always to the very end of the age. In that Great Commission, we have a promise that Jesus will continually open doors. But so often, we still try to get through the door on our own way. We try to force our way through doors that are are locked. We can become so obsessed with trying to figure out things on our own, trying to figure out how to open these doors that have been closed. We think that there's all kinds of combinations and all kinds of keys, and we just stand at the door and we just sit there and we literally just bang our head against this door because that's the one that we want to go through. But Jesus says, I will open the door. I know what's best. I will open the door at the right time, and you can trust me to walk through. I will always be presenting you with opportunities to walk through these open doors. So many people, they say that they want to find God's will for their lives. They rack their brains trying to figure out what God's will is for their life. They turn on the TV and see if a certain ad pops up to see if that's God's will for their life. They look at the combination of letters on a license plate to see if God's trying to speak to them in some sort of crazy way. They just flip through their Bible and say, okay, I'm going to go right here. That's what Jesus wants to say to me today. We do everything to try and figure out what is God's will for my life. But if I may we worry. I mean, it's not that we don't need to worry about what God's will is for our life, but instead of worrying solely on what God's will is for our life, may we begin to worry about learning to know his voice. Because honestly, nearly everything that you need to know about God's will for your life has already been said to you. You just have to walk through the open doors. Jesus said, my sheep, they know my voice and they will follow me. God's will is found in God's words. Following Jesus through open doors is about listening for his voice and then doing what he says. But the second thing I think we can learn from the church in Philadelphia is simply to walk through open doors. That's what fulfilling the Great Commission looks like. We've already kind of hit on this, but Jesus doesn't just open doors. Jesus truly wants us to walk through the doors. And I think so often we forget this. And so we see what Jesus is doing a little bit, we have an idea of where Jesus is leading, what our God-given burden is, and we go to the door, and it's like we just sit there and we just keep going, knock, 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 knock. And if we would just take a step back and look at the door, we would see that there's a great big neon sign on it that says, come on in. But instead, we just sit there and knock and knock and knock. Some of you today, you need to quit knocking. It's not that you don't know what God is calling you to do. It's just that you don't want to do it. We know Jesus called us to serve and not to be served. And so you don't need to ask, Jesus, do you want me to serve? The answer is yes. We know that Jesus desires for us to be a part of a Jesus-minded community. You don't need to ask, Jesus, do you want me to be a part of a Jesus-minded community? The answer is yes. You know that Jesus has told you to go and make disciples. So Jesus, do you want me to share the hope that I have in you with others? You don't need to ask that question. The answer is yes. So many of the questions that we ask, we already have the answers to. We're supposed to make disciples. Okay, so we need to extend invitations. We know that we're supposed to take care of those who are hurting, and so we need to make a meal and we need to take it to somebody's house. Those are not things that we need to ask questions about. Those are things that we already know the answer to. So quit knocking and start sharing. Quit knocking and start serving. Quit knocking and start telling people about the hope that you have in Jesus. We don't need more open doors. We just need to walk through the ones that already exist. John Ortberg, I love this quote so much. He says that open doors are divine invitations to make our lives count. With God's help and for the sake of others. Honestly, it's not that tough to find God's leading in our lives. There are open doors all around us. In your neighborhood, at your job, at your school, in your homes. We just have to walk through them. And then finally, the last thing I think we learned from the church in Philadelphia is this. It's a simple message. Hold on. Hold on, church. Again, this is what we've talked about throughout this series. This is really the bottom line of the entire book of Revelation. Things are going to get hard. Things are going to get tough, so hold on. Things are going to get worse, so hold on. Opposition is going to be present, and it's going to come from all directions, so hold on. Don't give up, because in the end, we win. But you may find that this difficulty or this hardship, you might find that it meets you on the other side of that open door. And while God may not prevent that attack, He promises, if you hold on, that He will see you through it. And so if I may today, can I just encourage you with something today? And it's this: whenever you feel like giving up or giving in, would you do me a favor? Would you remember that the victorious King Jesus loves you? Would you remember that He's called you? Would you remember that this victorious King Jesus, it's Him who holds you? Would you remember who He is? That He is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He is the first and the last. He is the Prince of Peace, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb of God. He is mighty God. He is the author. He is the perfecter of your faith. He is the one who began a good work in you, who will see it to completion. He has no rival. He has no equal. He is the name above all names. And if this Jesus opens a door for you, you can trust Him to walk right on through. So here's what I would like for us to do. I would love it if we would be a church who would hold on to the one who is holding on to you. Hold on to the one who is holding on to you. Jesus writes to this little church in Philadelphia to tell them that nothing is going to shake them loose from Him, that He will hold on to them, that never again will they ever feel like that He has been abandoned. So He tells them to stand firm, to depend on Jesus, to stand firm but not to stand still, but to walk through the open doors that Jesus has opened before you. And when all is said and done, you'll be standing in a new city with a new name. Again, Jesus, He said, I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on him a new name. There's something about a name. A name gives a sense of identity. And the great news is that we have a new name. And we are going to live in a new city that will never fade away. I think it's 4 or 5 months now. I don't remember. I think it was the end of October whenever it started. But over the last 4 or 5 months, I've lost both of my grandmas. And I had the honor of doing the funeral services for both of my grandmas. The 2 most special funerals I've ever done and possibly will ever do. My last grandma, she died early last month, Grandma Turner. And as I went back to my hometown and I was sitting around the living room with my family and we were talking about all the memories and everything, all the great memories, like I just remembered how much I loved my grandma's house. I always felt so safe at my grandma's house. You know, I always got to act like a little goober at my grandma's house, and nobody expected anything different. I remember as a little kid, my mom would always take me to grandma's house on her way to work, so that way my brother and I could walk to school together. And during some of those years, I created like this little racket, you know, and my grandpa had this big jar of quarters. And every day I would go and take a handful of quarters. Then I would go to my school and you could buy little notebooks and pencils for $0.25, and then I would sell them for a profit. And it all went so well until my grandpa caught on. And then I've never been so scared in my entire life. We had open lunch whenever I was in high school, and so often I would go to my grandma's house for lunch. She always had Hot Pockets on standby. I remember going to my house. So many of the memories I have as a kid, growing up or at my grandma's house every Christmas. My family, they love these white elephant gifts. And some white elephant gifts are fun. My family's white elephant gifts, they're not fun. They're stupid. Like it's not a white elephant gift. It's essentially who can get the most stuff out of their junk drawer. Everybody has that. And get away with it. It was awful. It is awful. If any of you are watching right now, you know where I stand. It's awful. But I can still smell my grandma's house. I can smell my grandma's pantry. She had this cedar pantry. And on the bottom shelves, she had those Sam's-sized giant barrels of cheese balls. Those were great. She always had vanilla cookies, like those vanilla cookies that have like vanilla on the top, cream in the middle, and chocolate on the bottom that were made in like dallies or dillies or whatever they're, like kind of shapes. She had those. She had every kind of Sam's Cola, Walmart brand soda that exists. If you ever wanted some Mountain Lightning, my grandma had you. Did you need a Dr. Thunder fix? Just go to my grandma's house. She had you ready. I love my grandma's house. At the end of the funeral, I said these words. I said, on Saturday morning, shortly after 5 a.m., Grandma passed through the veil and walked into her new house. A place with no more pain and no more tears and no more sickness and no more sorrow. But God willing, still with that cedar pantry and all the Sam's Choice Cola that anyone could ever want. And in about another 20 or 50 or 100 years, once again, we'll all be able to visit Grandma's new house. And as good as 1110 Ridgecrest was, this one will be so much better. Because this one will be made perfect. Because Grandma's new house is really Jesus' house. In John 14, Jesus said, in my Father's house, there are many, many rooms, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. My friends, that's where my grandma is right now. All because of the faith and the hope that she had in Jesus, and because of the fruit that was produced in Grandma's life. That's why I can tell you today, I can't wait to go to Grandma's house again. My grandma's house has next to nothing to do with my grandma. And it has everything to do with Jesus. And the invitation that made my grandma's house Jesus' house, that invitation is available to you today as well. The door is open. Will you walk in?